time to wake up and pray up here on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. I am Wes Easley, one of your hosts, and of course, I am always joined with on this podcast by Michelle and by Pierre, a married couple from up north. I am from down south, so that makes me a Southerner. That makes them a Yankee, Pierre and Michelle. Do you guys know that you're Yankees?
You could have said Northerner. I mean, it would have still fit just everywhere.
Well, that's true. It could have, but I've always liked the term, Yankee, and I don't mind being called. I would say that I don't like being called a hillbilly, but there's a little part of me, like a redneck or something. I don't mind being called that a little bit. That means I'm out in the sun. That means I'm working. That means I'm doing things out in the yard a lot, and I think that's where the terminology comes from a redneck standpoint. I'm not sure where Yankee came from. I'd have to Google that in order to find out where Yankee derives from.
I'm not sure. I know the New York Yankees. I remember singing Yankee Doodle as a kid, and that's about it. I do like how you clarified that we're not always with you. You started with that, like they're always with me, and you're like always with me on the podcast. So thanks for clarifying, so we don't come off as creepers.
Yeah, we're just in your pocket.
I'm always wondering where you are, and I have a Michelle and a Pierre in my pocket. I lock it in my pocket. I don't know. Hey, but you are joining us here, and we are a podcast just made for everyday people talking about everyday things. Sometimes it's controversial, sometimes it's not. We're trying to live our lives the best way that we possibly can, because at one point in our lives, we were all lost. Pierre, Michelle, and myself, I could speak for all three of us. We were all lost, but then we were found. We found a way that made our lives a little bit better, and so we try to share that with others, and we do that. One of the ways is through a podcast form, Pierre, something that you came up with.
Yeah, just wanted to talk through life, and we're in a couple life groups ourselves. At least I'm in a couple. We lead one, and just good conversations that take place that make you really think. About your faith, about the Bible, and just about life itself. And I thought, why not, do this in front of a microphone, as if we're having these conversations, if we're struggling with it, and what's going to stop others? They're probably going through the same thing. So let's talk it through and perhaps reach out to at least one person. I think we've done that by now. So I guess we're targeting one more.
Well, and a big shout out to all of our friends in Jordan. Pierre, you told me that we are highly ranked in Jordan.
That's amazing. Yeah, I got a notification. So Charitable is basically like a ranking website. They rank podcasts through Apple, through Spotify, and a bunch of others. And all of a sudden I got an email alert. I still check the emails, Wes. And it said, basically, congratulations, you're ranked in Jordan. I'm like, oh, okay, we're probably, 100 or something. And I looked, we're like 23. I'm like, whoa.
And we were 9.
And, the Bible Recap was number 1. I think Girls Gone Bible was number 2. Really popular podcast. So to be in the top 25 was just spectacular. So thanks to, our listeners over in the country of Jordan. And like, yeah, she said we were up to 9, apparently. It gives me like a tracker. We were ranked 9 at some point. And our episode 22 actually got as high as number 3 over there. So that's just spectacular. So a heartfelt thanks to whoever's listening over in the country of Jordan. We appreciate that.
And it was so funny. Pierre brings his phone in to show me. I was working, and he opens the door and he holds his phone out and he shows me, and I was like, okay. And I was like, whoa, we're ranked really. I was like, who's Jordan? And then I was like, wait, you mean as in the country?
And I hope one of the reasons why is because we do try to keep everything in somewhat layman's terms. I think is how the show's been described before, where we're not necessarily trying to be theologians. We try to talk about the Bible. We try to talk about Christ-like things. We try to talk about those circumstances in life that pertain to the Bible and glean wisdom from Scripture, I guess, is what we try to do, Michelle. And so I'm glad, and I hope that that's kind of the effect of it all. But Pierre, you and I were texting each other. I don't know if that's what we call it or not. Whenever we do it on the X platform, we were. How would people get a hold of us over there on X? How would they follow the show?
It's at Finding Faith Pod is our handle over there, and then we also have an email. findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com.
So if people wanted to get in touch with us, and they can kind of text you towards those by using that email and using the X thing. I was doing it on the X platform as well with you. And then all of a sudden, our little text message stuff started it took a right turn, and a right turn down lane is what I would call it, Pierre. I don't know, because it became very I don't want to say heated. It wasn't heated. We weren't arguing, but we just have this kind of ongoing conversation about a couple of things, and you just I could feel the passion when you were pushing the buttons to make this text message on X go through to me. And I thought, boy, that's something we got to talk about on the show. And you were right there for it as well.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on a variety of topics. We had talked, divorce. We mentioned some of the homosexuality stuff, and really what I was passionate about was just, what this episode is probably going to be about, and that's just being more Christ-like. I just feel like it lacks amongst a lot of so-called Christians, but I think that even falls on us at times. So there's times where I'm not the man I want to be in my own household or outside in the world, and that's something I feel like we really should be more passionate about. We have these conversations about who we are and how we're changed, but we don't always present that person to others.
My biggest question, I don't know which one of you two are wordsmiths, because I'm definitely not a wordsmith. How do you spell Christ-like? Is that one word? Is it two words with a little hyphen in the middle of it? What do you spell? How do you spell Christ-like?
I've always seen it with a hyphen.
Yeah, same here.
All right. Well, I had to put that to rest in my mind. I don't know.
So really cool story as we kind of go into this. So as the listeners know, as you know, Wes, we have a life group. Mm-hmm. That we run, and we meet on Thursday. So we're usually meeting actually right now in this moment. But we had some schedule conflicts that we met last night. And maybe halfway through,
first of all, it was truly last minute that we met last night.
Yeah. So maybe halfway through, there's this couple that shows up, and they just kind of walk into church for a moment. Then they come over to us, they grab a seat, and they kind of just pull up a chair and ask if they can listen. And we're like, sure. Yeah, as Michelle just stated, we meet on Thursdays, and last minute decided, hey, let's just do tonight. Let's do Wednesday night. Most people can be there. So I sent out a little group message to everyone saying, hey, we're just going to meet tonight at the church. So meet us there.
Okay, now time out. Let me. Can I call a timeout just to make sure that this is all set up right?
Timeout, so you can't add. You've already done it. So timeout it is.
Let me make sure this is set up well. And we did not talk about this before the show. All right, just to put it out there for the listeners. We talked about we did the text thing on the X last week, and so we've been planning for the episode here, and we were going to record. I think last night is when we record, and then you two canceled on me, of course. But no, and you said our life group is going to meet on Wednesday night instead of Thursday night. So can we change it to tomorrow night? And of course we could. That was fine. So this is all something that we talk about on the show where it's beyond our control, right? Mm-hmm. And I tell you guys that I try to not worry about those things that are beyond my control, because when it's beyond my control, I try to go, okay, God, you're controlling this. What's my part in all of this? I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to look for what your desires are, and I'm going to try to carry out whatever your wishes are through my little hands. That's kind of how things go in my life, and that's how I try to go with the flow and not stress out about things, not worry about things. And the podcast is one of those instances as well, especially when you try to record with people who are all over the United States, like we do at times. So that's how the story is. So you guys go there, last minute, you're holding your class on a different night, and then these people walk in. So this is getting juicy.
Yeah, and we're halfway through. I mean, we were halfway through our meeting.
Oh, they came in late.
Yeah. Oh, way late. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so they just pull up a chair, ask they can listen. We're like, sure. And I initially thought it was a new member from last week because I didn't get to go last week. But the way Michelle was looking at me, I'm like, no, she doesn't know who these two people are.
You guys really should lock the church doors, by the
way. We should have, but
I'm glad we didn't.
I'm glad we didn't either. Okay. So finally chime in. They are from Portland, Oregon, where they came out, and they just moved to Indiana in December. Just started attending the church, and I know the husband was 61 years old, and he finally started to talk, and he basically dove into the fact that his wife saved his life. He was at a point where he was facing opioids that he was dealing with and just other things that he was battling in life. And he felt God brought his now wife into his life. And, he shared some stuff on his son that had passed away. And it was just really, really, really heartwarming. And so we're like, wow. And we're getting the tissues out. People are crying.
Oh, I know Michelle's crying.
Watch it, Wes.
This couple's just, sharing their story to our group, and we're all new to them. And they're like, yeah, like this is like a date for us. And like a date. It's like, yeah, church is a date. You show up and, you dress up nice and you hear good music. You may get to dance. And we're like, okay, well, what led you here? And I was like, well, we were told that there was a Bible study here tonight. We got an alert. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But we don't meet on Thursdays. Like, we're not that Bible study. That's not us. And we didn't send out that alert.
And there wasn't one. I mean, there was a women's group that was meeting, but there was not a Bible study. So,
and this was their first attempt at just trying to, like, we want to go to the church. We saw there were cars here. Something told us to come on this night, and here we are.
Something told us, meaning the alert, right?
What's that?
Something told us to come on this night, meaning the alert, right?
Well, the alert is about First Wednesday, which is the first Wednesday of each month, which is actually next week.
Yeah.
But yeah, they show up and we're like, yeah, we don't usually meet on this night, but we happen to be here tonight. You happen to show up. We have this connection and really good conversation. It was just really super cool. But how that ties in is, so the husband multiple times gave us a reason why he's, trying to continue to get better. And what he kept saying was, I just want to be more Christ-like.
No.
And I looked at Michelle and we knew what the topic was going to be on this. So the fact that this couple shows up to the church on a night that we don't usually meet, to our life group, shares their story, and her husband's focus was to just be more Christ-like, is how he wants to kind of move forward on.
I can't even count the number of times he said that either.
Jaw-dropping to me.
Yeah.
One of those coincidental accidentals, right? I think I just termed up a phrase there. Coincidental accidentals is what that is. That's very, very unique. And it's great to see how things like that work in our lives. And I don't get shocked by that stuff anymore. I don't get amazed by it anymore. I do to some degree, like I'm like, wow, that's cool, But at the same time, I'm not like, yeah, I always think that God sometimes just enjoys playing with me a little bit, toying with me, and having fun like this. That's a cool story. That's a great story. That's a great story.
It's pretty hard.
I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like, we got home and I'm like, we weren't even supposed to be there. Like, we don't meet that night. And he kept talking about being Christ-like, and that's what we're getting ready to talk about in our pod. It was just
and you talked about you need to lock the doors. Typically, the doors are locked. Yeah.
Once everybody gets in, we lock the doors usually. Yeah. But I didn't know, like, there was a women's group taking place. I didn't know if they could get in, so I just left it unlocked, and sure enough,
another anomaly.
This couple comes in and finds us.
FYI, what we do at our church whenever we have meetings like that on those nights is we have a man stationed at a door, or maybe two doors even, that people usually come in. So we have security, which is one of our own men that stand at the door just to kind of give a presence there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, and the door is locked, but we still just give a presence to unlock the door. Well, we don't keep people out, but at the same time. So cool story. Now that has a little bit of ramifications into what we were texting about or DMing about. I'm going to
you were texting.
That. Yeah, we just say texting. I'm just going to say texting. It's the same thing. But we were texting about Pierre, and you were passionate because it seemed like somebody was doing somebody wrong. The conversation was somebody doing something wrong. That's what I remember of it. I have a short memory, and I don't remember a lot of things. I just remember, like, me sending you a video, and it was a video of a debate between Barack Obama and somebody that he was running against whenever it was back in Illinois times too. I mean, it was, in the 90s at some point. I don't even know. It could have been 2000s. I don't know. But it was before he was president. It was still when he was, I think it was senator in Illinois. And you're just, you just went off on on a tangent, and I was like, "Holy cow! I didn't mean to open up a can of worms there, but I did."
Yeah, I don't remember that topic, but yeah, you caught me at a unique time, and I remember the video, and I'm just like, I feel like this is a conversation we have to have because, again, I feel like there's a lot of people that claim to be something that they don't necessarily portray in their real life. And I mean, we'll just say Christians. Like, I feel like there are times that Christians, which the first part of that is Christ, aren't Christ-like. And I think it's a good topic because I know I fall into this bucket myself at times in life, but we've talked about in other episodes. I really feel like one of the bigger turnoffs for those trying to find faith or interested in their faith and growing that is how those that claim to be in the church, claim to be loving, claim to be like Christ are far from it.
All right. So it's kind of like it's your attitude, right? It's our attitudes. Not only our attitudes towards those who are in the church, but also those who are outside of the church. And what are we going to do with those attitudes? And let me ask you guys this, Michelle, maybe I'll direct this question over to you. Does it depend on how that person is reacting? Let's say we run up on somebody out there in the streets, out in, we're shopping at Walmart or something like that. We run into somebody and they're just not acting very nicely. Is it up to them to be able to bring the Christ-like out in us, or do we just need to exhibit that towards them regardless of how they're acting?
I think it's that we need to do it regardless of how they're acting. And here's the thing. Let me just preface all of this by saying, first of all, I have no idea what the two of you are talking about. So this is going to be really interesting. Pierre and I talk the most on this podcast. So, but one thing that I do want to interject really quickly is that based on what Pierre just said, I will say that the reason that, as far as I understand it, because I was young, but the reason that I've always been told that we stopped going to church when I was a child is because my dad and mom got really fed up and frustrated with the hypocrisy that they were witnessing. Like if somebody came in not dressed to the nines and hearing people talk about, look what they wore to church and look who's here and why are they here? And I think we've talked about that. We've touched on that before, that church should be for everyone. And that's the point. It's for the sinners and the poor and the broken. And it's not a place for perfect people because none of us are perfect. But to answer your question, Wes, I think that it is our duty to act Christ-like. No matter how someone is acting, we need to still show grace and love. And that is not the easiest. And I will say, I too fail at that. And I hate that I do. And sometimes I beat myself up over it. And even not just in public, but in private, like even my interactions with my daughter or with my mom and dad or with Pierre or my siblings, it's tough. So
I remember when before I became a Christian, you'd have to catch me. I was always a people pleaser, I guess, but you'd have to catch me on a good day in order to like go out of my way to help you. I would just assume knock an old lady down and take her wallet instead of helping her across the road. You know what I mean? I mean, it was one of those things where I was a people pleaser whenever I was working, but if I wasn't working, I never never looked for any way to help somebody outside of, being at work and being an employee at some place. That just wasn't what I did. Mm-hmm. I was always to myself. I always kept to myself, and I didn't want anybody to bug me, and I didn't want to bug anybody. And that was kind of the Yankee in me, Now that I'm a Southerner, I feel like I'm always trying to be helpful a little bit more. Maybe I've been taught a little bit better than what I was taught up north. But also as a Christian, I kind of take that work ethic with me always wherever I go at all times. Now, that doesn't mean I'm perfect all the time, but I would like to think that I'm never rude or beyond rude. Maybe I am and I don't know it. Maybe I cut off somebody accidentally trying to get to something that I want to get to, but I don't think I am. I think I try to make sure that I'm always yielding to people and allowing them to go in front of me and stuff like that if I'm in a store. But I think down here, I'm always, or now anyway in my life, I'm always having that same attitude of I'm on the clock for God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always working for him. So I'm always trying to find ways to help out others along the way, if that makes any sense to you.
I think that's a great way to put it, that you're on the clock. I mean, have that mentality.
Now, I was going to say, Pierre, that doesn't always mean I agree with everybody and how they are acting, but that doesn't mean I treat them that doesn't mean I treat them badly because of how they're acting. That doesn't mean I treat them badly, Pierre, because of how they're dressed or maybe how they speak. It doesn't mean that I treat them or go out of my way to treat them rough. And actually, I look for ways to encounter them to somehow try and shine a light in their life that I think needs to be shined because maybe they are just in a dark place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the balance of what that looks like is where the struggle is.
Mm-hmm.
So like part of our conversation, I know, we talked about, Michelle's been divorced before. There's a couple in one of my life groups that's the case, like the same situation, the wife's been divorced before and, remarried to who her husband is now. And their previous church, like kicked them out. They knew she was married. They knew her previous husband, and they knew that who she was married to now was not that previous husband. So they, respectfully asked them not to attend their church anymore. When you think about what the church should be, like, how is that Christ-like? How do you reach those people? And I think part of our conversation on Twitter /X with the DM was a note that came to me from someone in the homosexual community and their thoughts on Christians. And they said that the meanest, most narrow-minded people that they've ever encountered all have one thing in common. They're Christian. And they made the note that most Christians play the role of Pharisees rather than Christ. This was someone that also, grew up in church, etc. And, I won't go into that whole conversation, but just reading that, you have to think, so how do we get to this point and how do we fix it? And I'm not necessarily saying you have to accept certain lifestyles, but how do you not come across as the meanest and cruelest to something that you might just disagree with?
Well, and Pierre and I did have this conversation because he showed me the text, and my reaction was, the first thing I said was, that's really sad that we're not, as a Christian community, not loving and acting like Jesus, because Jesus was not here with the Pharisees. He was here with the sinners, the broken, the rejected, and he loved them in spite of that. And the second part of that was, I also, and if I'm really brutally honest, I really struggle with where is that line? Because I also believe that we're supposed to hold up what the Bible says. Yeah. And so as a Christian, where is the line between holding the line of what the Bible says versus being loving? And I think that's the key, is we are first called to love and be like Jesus. And if we go beyond that, it's a judgment thing, and it's not for us to judge. However, this is where I personally struggle. Like, how do you stand up for your beliefs? I mean, I don't know. I hope you know what I'm trying to get across here. Like, there is a line there. It's a gray area. And that's where I struggle as just a human being, is always in that gray area, whether it's in my walk with God or in work. Whenever there's a line that's kind of shaded, I like to be in control of things. That's just who I am. And so I struggle when it's outside of my comfort zone, and it is in that gray area. So I hope I explained that well enough, but
it's a great conversation that we're having right now. It takes us a little bit to get warmed up, it feels like, but we're having a great conversation right now. I'm going to go over to 1 John chapter 2. Okay. My little children, I am writing these things to you that you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And he himself is the propitiation for our sins. The only reason why I want to read that is because propitiation was like the first big word I ever learned in the church. And I just love saying the word propitiation. It's a cool word. It sounds cool, doesn't it?
It's fun. Yeah.
It was a propitiation for us. That means he's the one, he's the gift for our sins. He's how so if I ever needed a propitiation with my wife, some people would bring my wife, if she was angry at me or whatever, some people would bring their wives like a dozen roses. Well, that would be a propitiation for your sins against your wife, right? Here's the dozen roses. Take this on behalf of my sins. I am sorry for what I've done, right? For me, it was a dozen donuts. If I got a dozen donuts instead of a dozen roses, I was in, man. That was a good, smooth move. Can I please have a dozen propitiation donuts, please? That's what I need to bring home to my wife. But so Christ was that propitiation to God. He says, here, I am their offering. I am what is standing between you and their sins. I am giving myself up for their sins. So he was the dozen donuts. I don't believe that has ever been done before, saying that Jesus was a dozen donuts. But you guys understand what I'm saying. Please take that in context.
I guess. He had to be Krispy Kreme because those are the best. So.
He was hot Krispy Kreme.
That's right.
He was hot Krispy Kreme.
The light was on, literally.
Yes, there you go. He himself is the propitiation for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for those who the whole world. And by this we know that we have come to know him, if we keep his commandments. The one who says, I have come to know him, and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. It's going to get good here in a second. I got to read verse 5 though. But whoever keeps his word, in him the love of God is truly been perfected. By this we know that we are in him. Now, the perfected part, I think we're all a work in progress, myself included, so it takes a little bit to get to that Jesus level of perfection. Can we say that? I mean,
absolutely.
I don't know if it'll ever happen.
No.
You got to work towards it.
Speak for yourself. But
I am speaking for myself.
Verse 6, the one who says he abides in him ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked. So we're seeing some good goals here laid out by John. And the way John said it at first there in verse 1, my little children. So this is, I picture it, old gray-haired John with a big gray beard, and he's trying to tell us how to live our lives. And he says in verse 6 there that you ought to walk in the same manner that he walked. But beloved, I'm not writing a new commandment to you, but an old commandment which you have had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which you have heard. On the other hand, I'm writing a new commandment to you, which is true in him, and that you in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away, and the true light is already shining. The one who he says he is in the light and yet hates his brother is in the darkness until now. The one who loves his brother abides in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. We are supposed to be the light of the world, right?
Yes.
And we are supposed to shine that light in the darkness. Now, let me tell you something. If you go walking through my house right now, my 8-year-old has Legos laid all over the place. And I mean, literally. Somehow the Lego room got set up right next to the front room windows over there. And she has just been over there playing. She is now becoming a Lego engineer, I guess, building house after house after house. But while she's doing it and searching for her part, she just, that's not the one I need, and discards it. And there's Legos all over the floor because she doesn't put the Legos back in the tub. And she just puts them all over the floor. Yeah. And in the dark, those things can hurt.
Yeah.
In the dark, life can hurt. Sin can hurt. And let me tell you something. If I step on one of those Legos and I'm right there in the middle of hurt, and I'm yipping and yapping and jumping around with one foot, like that, and just angry as can be at the Legos. You know how they are. And
Mhm.
somebody turns on a light and says, "Can I help you?" All I'm going to do is look at them and growl. "No, you can't help me. Just put up these Legos." I'm just going to, you're not going to hear me be very kind at that point because I'm hurting.
Mhm.
I think it's the same thing in life. If somebody is in the middle of that hurt, in the dark, and you go trying to tell them, "Hey, what can I do for you? Hey, let me help you. Let me." No. That's not what you do. You try to shine the light for a while, and you just be there to see if you can help. You start looking around for the thing that hurt them and start trying to pick up the Legos. You start trying to pick up the pieces for them without them even knowing it, right? But if you just take a blinding light in somebody's eyes that's already hurting, that's just going to make things worse. So I think we're talking about all this stuff, I think that the first steps in all this is to build that relationship, to be a light to people who are in the dark, so that then, Michelle, we are being friends with them, and then we can maybe start talking about those spiritual matters that may be concerning for their souls.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's the steps, and I think that that's the process in doing that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, I'll be the first to say, like, I struggle with judgment myself sometimes. Like, Pierre and I go round and round about stuff sometimes because I find myself being judgmental, and I'm faster, I'm quicker to recognize it these days, which I'm very thankful for. And I've come to the place recently where I've realized through Pierre and I's conversations and through our sermons and my Bible study that you have to guard your thoughts. So it's not even necessarily what comes out of your mouth, but what you think. So I've really, really been trying very hard to keep that in mind and to make sure that the thoughts that come through my head are pure, and that I'm not just speaking things with my mouth or feeling them with my heart, but actually coming together as one, my mind, my soul, my thoughts, like all of it, because I think it's super important. And I'm truly struggling with that these days. Like, we really quickly, when we had the topic on divorce, I struggled because one of the things the pastor said, and I had to talk about it with our life group last week, and I was brutally honest that, hey, I'm really struggling with this one, because if I heard him correctly, he said that I can be forgiven, but I'll never be favored by God. And I was like, whoa, hold up. So anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. And it was just my point in that was that just because we as a trio here have these conversations and Pierre and I lead the life group and we have this podcast, it does not mean for a second that we don't go, hold on, what does that mean? And that we don't struggle too, and
Sure.
like have our frustrations with things that we hear and that we have to grapple with. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there really quickly. But Wes, I think that you're right in that how we deal with those things is really important, and to just be there as a support for people as much as we can, even if we disagree with them.
And Pierre, have you ever seen that group? And I don't know what church it is or where it is from or anything. I think they're in Texas or something. I could be absolutely wrong about that. Where they'll go out and they will just picket, like in front of some kind of place, and just talk. And their picket signs are all like, "You guys are going to hell." I mean, they just sit there and they picket and they just yell to people. And I mean, they're very forceful in their condemnation of these folks without ever having a relationship with them. They're just calling them sinners and just telling them that they're damned for life.
I'm not familiar with that, but I know the practice. Like I've seen it on street corners and megaphones, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so there's I don't know if there's a time for that or not. I don't know.
Did Jesus ever pick it?
there were times when he went into the temple though, right?
Okay. And yeah,
With
overturn the table. Okay.
Yep, and had a whip, and he just started chasing everybody off and telling them that they were all sinners and doing that kind of stuff. He was doing that in a very forceful manner.
Well, why? Why was he doing that? What was his boiling point?
Well, I'm not sure what the boiling point was. I know that he said, maybe this is what you're talking about, that this is my father's house, and you shouldn't, don't turn it into a den of thieves.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's upset about what's happening, in the temple, what's taking place there. But when you look at human beings that he interacted with outside of the temple, who did he turn away?
Nobody.
Nobody. So if we're calling ourselves Christians, which translates technically to Christ-like, who should we be turning away?
Nobody.
Nobody. And it's not happening. Regardless, it's not just, certain communities, certain contexts. You got different churches, different people that turn away different type. And my thought process is, how do we overcome that? We mentioned, Jesus didn't come for the Pharisees. There was a point where he was having dinner with a Pharisee. And after that dinner was over, a woman comes in, which, if you know anything about kind of back then, that's kind of a process where, like, the party's getting started. I'm guessing, it was a prostitute. She lays down at his feet, rubbing her hair, perfume, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, it sounds like that party's getting started. You know what I'm saying?
Right? But as all the Pharisees are in shock and kind of disgusted, Jesus doesn't react the same way. We got the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments talks about, no adultery. The woman at the well, she was an adulterer. How did Jesus treat her? So we have folks that are clearly sinning, and she clearly broke a commandment herself. That's why she's at the well, when she was at that time of day. But how did Jesus react and treat her and change ultimately her life in that moment? And then think about how we, in different scenarios, but similar scenarios, treat others with that same approach. And I honestly think about, I don't know if you've seen the movie, it's called Jesus Revolution, based off a true story out in the West Coast. But ultimately, a bunch of hippies decide to follow, God, follow Jesus, and start attending this church that does not allow hippies. And you see a bunch of the prominent members, the donors, basically say this isn't going to work. Like, you invite them in here, we're leaving. And it became that pastor's job to have a sense of, okay, how do I react to this? Do I let my biggest donors go? Maybe deacons of the church, or do I invite in these outcasts that don't look like us, don't act like us, don't behave like us, that are hungry for Jesus? And ultimately, he went with the hippie route, and this whole Jesus revolution exploded.
Yeah. I've heard about that. I haven't necessarily seen that. There's been other movies like that too that are similar. But yeah, you would hope that the more mature would understand what the bigger goals are, and that is to help people who are in the darkness, by being a light to those people. And you can't do that if you're, I don't want to say the doors, because you and I have talked before, or we've said it before many times on this podcast. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to church. That should be one of those ultimate goals for you. But to start that relationship with Christ and God, sometimes going to church is like one of the last steps somebody has to take. It's not the first step. Sometimes the first step is, like we've talked about before, is just praying. It's just opening that door, just acknowledging the name.
It's true. It's true. But I also feel like in certain situations, there's like the blind leading the blind with some of us. You talk about, being the light for the darkness. We have to stop being the darkness ourselves. Not everybody,
That's
there's good
hard.
people, but there are times when we think we're the light and we're not, and we're trying to fight darkness with darkness, and that's not going to get the job done. That's not going to do what we're called to do, which is what are we called to do above all else?
Love one another.
Yeah, love God and love each other. And we talked about like our purpose before, and I think I've even tied it into a song by Elevation Worship with our purpose. But I've actually kind of swayed a little bit because I think that the above all else is our purpose in life. It's to simply love God and love each other. I think that's ultimately why we're here. I think that's why God made the creation. I think that's why we have our own kids, is to hope that they can, just enjoy life, get to experience life, ultimately find a relationship with God and love those surrounding them. And I feel like it might be that simple, and we're just missing the mark.
Mm-hmm.
After Jesus fed the 5,000, and people went away, and everybody was fed, and people went away, and it says in verse 18 of Luke chapter 9, it came about that while he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he questioned them. He said, who do the multitudes say that I am? And they answered and said, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah. One of the prophets of old has risen again, is what people are saying. And he said to them, okay, that's who they say. But who do you say that I am? And Peter answered and he said, you are the Christ of God. You are the sent one. You are the chosen one. You are the one from God. Not any of those replicas. You're not any of those foreshadowings. Not John the Baptist. You're not Elijah. You are the real deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is after they've seen him do all these different miracles, when they're kind of understanding things, when they've been with him for a long time. And he answered them and instructed them not to tell anyone this, right? His time wasn't up yet, is the reason why. He still had things to do. He said, the Son of Man must suffer many things, but and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and raised up on the third day. That's weighty, guys. That's pretty weighty to know that that's going to come, and you have to go through with it, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For us, we are those people now who have to take losses in order to get a bigger victory for God. And that's what Jesus was doing here at this point. He was taking losses. I'm sure he wanted to tell these people, I didn't come here just to feed you. But he had to start that relationship with them, right? He had to provide those earthly needs so he could give them the spiritual needs that they really didn't even know that they needed. And if we shut people out and we turn away people and reject people before we can ever give them the spiritual goodness that they need, then we didn't do our job. Mm-hmm. Jesus said, if anybody wishes to come after me, which we do, right? You and I, the three of us, we do. We wish to come after him. Let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. For what is it if a man is profited, if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? We are to take up that cross daily. We are to be crucified with Christ so that we can live with him daily. And others can live with him as well. It's one of those real tricky things where, yes, we are to love the sinner, but hate the sin.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to love that sinner first, before we can tell them that we hate that sin. And I don't know that we would ever necessarily say hate that sin. I think about my children, and I have two daughters. I have to be delicate with my words. I haven't always accomplished that. And then I've had to go back and apologize for the things I said when I didn't accomplish that, and I wasn't delicate with my words in trying to teach them a lesson or trying to tell them that they were wrong about something. It always works out better whenever I approach them or my wife or anybody else with loving kindness first, and then shift it into a conversation where I'm trying to point out where they're wrong. But I try to approach that with even an open dialogue. This is why I think you're wrong. What do you think about that? And so I think that's what we have to do with others as well. We got to approach it like that. We can't be harsh with our words. We have to be loving kindness with our words. And then after we build a relationship with that individual or those people or that group or whatever it is, after we have that relationship with them, all of a sudden the conversation will be able to turn into, hey, why do you think that this is wrong? Or why do you think that this is right? It'll just the conversations will naturally occur.
Yeah, I think it's a good approach. You have to build a rapport. I mean, none of us just want to have someone come at you with, hey, shame on you, you're wrong. Like that just puts your defenses up immediately. Even if you agree with them, like at that point, you feel like you have to defend your position and want to prove your point. So I think you're right, Wes.
Well, I know I'm right, Michelle. That's just something that I'm trying to convince you of eventually.
Yes, well, built that rapport. So you
the whole text messaging on X was Pierre trying to figure out how he can convince you that he's right as well, Michelle.
Oh, he does that all the time. It's okay.
I could care less about being right. I could care less about followers. That doesn't bother me. But I mean, I do want to think about. So we think about all the miracles that take place in the Bible. Like, how many of those don't take place if Jesus isn't open and loving?
Mm-hmm.
Think about all the miracles we don't have if he just turned his nose up at someone or told them they were doing wrong or they did wrong in their past. So they needed to fix themselves before they could come to him.
One of the things I was thinking about since we had that conversation was how did he treated the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes. He treated them so different than he treated like the normal average everyday person. I'm sure there were different instances,
I don't think he did, honestly.
Really?
I think he gave them equal opportunity.
Okay.
And they chose to react to him differently than normal people.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying there. And at some point, to me, the conversation, he already knew where the conversation was going to go. Maybe he already saw what their hearts were like, or whatever. And maybe it's just me turning the TV on in my head, like I've said, and I see how he's doing that. Maybe I hear the tones of his voice differently than what they were necessarily directed. But that's something that I thought I was like, okay, there you go. There's a reason to read the Gospels again, Wes, is to look at how he treats the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes. See how he treats them, and does he treat them any differently than just the common person?
Well, and here's the thing, like, I think that's human nature, because we see these movies, and even as much as I love The Chosen, right? And I do, and it's helped me to bring the Bible to life. There's still someone else's interpretation of it. And so that gets in our head. And then when we read it, we see, because we've already have that impression, then we can apply that to what we're reading, right? So I think sometimes it is super important for us to, do our best to set that aside and really approach it in a different manner. And the reason that you stay in reading your Bible daily and, maybe rereading a passage 2 or 3 different times a week or whatever, like in your lifetime, however often that is, the reason we read it again is because we have different experiences that we've had since we read it last, and we may receive it differently. So, you could read something for like the 5th time and be like, whoa, wait a minute, I didn't see that last time. Or I didn't understand it that way because I hadn't had the experiences that I have now. So I think it is important to put that aside sometimes and not have those preconceived notions about things.
Yeah. Do you think this episode was a little more Christ-like, or did we fall short? How do you think, Pierre?
I think it was good conversations. I don't think an episode is going to be Christ-like. It's going to be what our actions are and what the listeners' actions are beyond this episode. But hopefully, it puts some thoughts into listeners' minds, and hopefully, it does it in our own minds. So even you talking about how to approach your daughters and stuff, I'm like, yeah, I can do better at that myself. So it's
Okay,
a situation. Go ahead.
So that's a plan of action. So we can treat our loved ones in our house maybe a little bit differently, right? We can maybe because I like to leave sermons whenever I hear them or something, whenever I'm reading the Bible. Okay, what's my plan of action after this? You know what I mean? I'm just a plan of action kind of a guy. So I want to know what my plan of action is after this episode, I guess. And one of them is to try to do I like that you said that I said that about my daughter, so I don't forget that. I'm writing it down. Make sure
About those Legos.
Yeah, well,
I think your plan of action should be above all else, Liz. It should be all of our plan of action.
Okay. All right. Michelle, what about you? What do you think a plan of action was from this one? This episode?
I actually agree with Pierre on this one. I think that it sounds so simple to just say that should be our plan of action, but man, to put that into action is sometimes very difficult when it goes against what we believe, how we feel, maybe even our experiences that we've had, bad experiences in the past from certain things, like to just be loving, even if we don't accept it. Like I think it's so easy to say and so very difficult to do. So I do agree with him. And I think that is just it's going to be a constant battle and a struggle, some more than others. But yeah, I think that is the takeaway in general.
I have two plans of action. One, I'm going to get the vacuum cleaner and suck up all those Legos laying all over the floor. That's one of the plans of action I'm going to do. And number two is tomorrow. No, it doesn't matter what day it is, because whenever you listen to this episode, you can maybe take the same plan of action. I'm going to get uncomfortable, and I'm going to meet somebody who I don't know their name, but yet they look kind of scary to me. Okay. And when I say scary, I just mean like they're out of my comfort zone.
I was going to say, don't get like robs or something.
No. I mean, because I'm in a lot of stores all the time, and I get to see a lot of people, and I'm all over the place. So there's a lot of strange characters that come. I'm going to find out their name. You got it? I'm going to find out their name. I'm going to introduce myself to somehow, some way, and I will find out their name as well, and we'll see where the conversation goes from there. How about that? That's my plan of action. And I say scary. I hope you understand. I just mean out of my comfort zone.
Yes, scary for you. Okay? Yes.
No, it's scary for me. They're not scary for me. I ain't scared.
Well, if you're our dog, you're scared of the vacuum cleaner. So.
Well, that's what I'm going to try to do. So I appreciate you guys spurring me on to good works here on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. And we will encourage you, the listeners out there in Jordan or wherever you are listening, we will encourage you to try and leave a review. You can slap the stars around, or you can do whatever you can do to leave a review on whatever podcast listening platform you're listening to us on. That would be great as well. That would be a plan of action. And the only reason why is because we love to hear from you. Pierre, we still have yet to have a question and answer session from questions from the listeners or anything like that, but I am still hoping for that one day.
I hope so too. And I've even asked a couple of folks that I know listen, and they're like, you guys explain things too well for us to have questions, which was nice, but I'm like, we still got to get Westy's questions because he's itching at it. So yes, if you can, email us findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com with any question you may want us to ask. You can also hit us up on Twitter /X @findingfaithpod.
Yes, or leave a comment on whatever listening platform you like to listen to the show on. That would work as well. And tell us your plan of action from this episode or any of the past episodes. You can always go back and listen to those archives. I think that those episodes will always be pertinent. I don't think that we were necessarily time sensitive on those things. So I think you can always glean a little bit of wisdom from any of those past episodes. And I look forward to future episodes as well. And you pray for us, and we will pray for you.